everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Sherry Perman. I'm the Executive Director of the Roswell Symphony Orchestra. We are so thrilled to be in Artesia to present Prokofiev's amazing story of Peter and the Wolf. We are grateful to be able to share this concert with you free of charge, thanks to our generous donors, including New Mexico Arts and the Armstrong Clark Foundation. We hope you'll join us after the concert on stage for an instrument petting zoo with members of our wonderful orchestra. Can you hear me? Without further ado, please help me welcome Maestro John Fair and the Roswell Symphony Orchestra.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. This special family presentation of Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf is something that we're looking forward to very much. And before we actually play the piece, I want to tell you a little bit about this particular environment in which the piece was composed, a bit about Prokofiev. We'll talk about the instruments of the orchestra, then we'll actually play the piece for you. There aren't very many pieces that I know written by great composers for young audiences, and this is one of them, Peter and the Wolf. In fact, it was actually made into a film by Disney some years ago. I don't know if any of you have seen that. The other one is a work by Benjamin Britten called The Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. It calls for a massive orchestra, very, very difficult. I'm not saying this one is easy, but it's more manageable with this size orchestra. Prokofiev was born in 1891, died in 1953. His talent was recognized at a very early age. He was taken to the best teachers, some of the most famous composers of the time. Glier and Glazunov, for example, were part of his teachers. He studied with the great Rimsky-Korsakov for a little while. But he would have been in his 20s when the Russian Revolution occurred in 1917. And he came to the conclusion that the turmoil at that time was not really good for someone who wanted to make a living as a composer and as a performer. He was a terrific pianist as well as a great composer. So he actually left Russia before it became the USSR, went to the United States with the permission of the new government. They thought that that was fine for him to do that. And he made his living in the United States for many, many years. Some of his most famous compositions, an opera called The Love for Three Oranges is one of them, were actually premiered in the United States, in Chicago in particular. But in the 1930s, he decided to go back to what was then the USSR, and it was at that time, 1936, that this piece, Peter and the Wolf, was written. It was written for a children's theater. The instrumentation that you will hear today is a little bit unusual because of the requirements of that small theater. In addition to the strings, one flute, one oboe, one clarinet, one bassoon, three horns, a trumpet, trombone, and percussion. Very unusual. I don't know another piece of music that has quite that instrumentation. It was a success right from the beginning, and it's remained a success for all of the years in between. So before we play the piece for you, let me introduce to you the instruments of the orchestra. For some of you, this will be old news, but for others, it will be new, so everybody, I hope, will learn something from it. First of all, let's start with the strings, and I would like to have the first chair string players to come out. The stringed instruments in the orchestra are called that because each of them has four strings which stretch from the top to the bottom of the instrument, and the sound most of the time is made by drawing a bow across the string. And generally, as with all instruments, there's a relationship between the size of the instrument and the timbre, or the depth of the sound. For example, the violin is the highest and the smallest of the stringed instruments, and it has the highest sound. Santiago, could we hear the violin, please? Thank you, sir. Very good. Now, if you would hold your instrument. This instrument on your right is the viola, V-I-O-L-A, and I think you can see that it's a little bit larger, but still the sound is made the same way most of the time, drawing a bow across the string, but because it's a little larger, it's a little deeper voice than the violin. Larger still is the cello, again, normally played seated. The instrument, though, still makes sound the same way, drawing a bow across the string. Dr. Montgomery, may we hear the cello, please? Cello, deep voice. The largest stringed instrument is the bass, B-A-S-S, as in foundation. It is still played the same way as the other stringed instruments, drawing a bow across the string. Mr. Taylor, could we hear the bass, please? Bass. But there you have members of the string family. The bass, cello, viola, violin. I'm going to ask these first chair players to take their places on stage, and I want you to hear the entire string family play together. Violins, violas, cellos, and double bass. This is actually an excerpt from Peter and the Wolf. That's the sound of all of the strings playing together, violins, violas, cellos, and basses. Let's talk next about the woodwind family. If we could have those first chair players up front, please. These instruments are called woodwinds because they are made of wood, or in the case of the flute, in its past was made of wood, and they produce sound with the breath or the wind. Therefore, they're called woodwinds. Each of these instruments makes sound in a little different way. For example, with the flute, sound is directed through an opening at the top of the instrument, and let me hold the pick while we do that. Okay. And Mrs. Hale, could we hear the flute, please? Thank you, flute. This small version is actually called small, piccolo in Italian, meaning small or small flute. Because it's smaller, it has a much higher pitch. Thank you, the flute and the piccolo. Now, the oboe is also a woodwind instrument, but it makes it sound completely differently. There is a reed at the top of the instrument. It's actually a piece of cane grown in the ground, harvested, cured, and so on, folded back on itself, and a little hole is cut at the top of it. Then it's wrapped around and so on. So this is the sound of the reed all by itself. Okay, and then you place that reed into the oboe, and it sounds like this. Thank you very much. That's the oboe. Now, the oboe and the clarinet look a lot alike, but if you look carefully, if you've got really good eyesight, you can see that the top of the clarinet is quite a bit different. There's just one single piece of cane there, and it's held in place with a ligature. The inside of the clarinet expands a little bit as it goes down toward the bell, and as a result, has a different sound. Could we hear the clarinet, please? Thank you, the clarinet, another woodwind instrument. The bass voice of the woodwind family is the bassoon, B-A-S-S-O-O-N, bassoon. There's that word bass or foundation again. It's the largest instrument in the woodwind family. It produces its tone with the same kind of reed as the oboe does. It's a little larger, but it makes that same initial crowing sound by itself. May we hear the bassoon, please, Professor Meek? The bassoon. So members of the woodwind family, bassoon, clarinet, oboe, flute, and piccolo. I'm going to ask these musicians to take their place on stage, which is up behind the strings. And when they're in place, we'll play another little excerpt from Peter and the Wolf, which demonstrates the entire woodwind family. The woodwind family of flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon. Next, we're going to talk about the brass family. If some brass players come down front. Brass are called that because of the alloy of which they're made, brass, which is a mixture of metals. They all make sound basically the same way. It starts with the ability to buzz the lips in a very special way, and it has, well, can you show us how that is? Great, okay, beautiful. And then that is done within the narrow confines of a mouthpiece. And believe it or not, you take those sounds and put them into the instruments, and you get this trumpet. Trumpet. Now we're a long way up here on stage, but I always ask Gussie, if you can see that there's a lot of tubing involved with the horn. How long would that tubing be if you were to straighten it out in one straight line?
This young man could hold the bell.
He could, okay.
About 27 feet.
27 feet. That's a lot of tubing. So it's a little easier to handle when it's all twirled around this way and so forth and so on. Okay, may we hear the horn, please? Thank you very much. The trombone is a larger brass instrument than the trumpet or horn. And it also is different in that it doesn't have valves. If you were watching, the trumpet was changing pitches using valves with his right hand, the horn with the left hand. The trombone changes pitches by moving a slide back and forth. May we hear the trombone, please? Thank you. All right, those are brass instruments, trombone, horn, trumpet, and when they take their places on stage, we'll play another bit from Peter and the Wolf for you, using the entire brass family. You just play as long as you want. I won't interfere. Those are the horns, not the whole brass. At any rate, you'll hear that music again a little bit later. All right, we've been introduced to strings, woodwinds, brass is another huge family, which is well represented in this piece, even though we just have 3 musicians here. That's called the percussion family. If you strike one object against another, that produces a percussive effect, and that's one of the things that's common between all of these instruments. Could we hear maybe timpani? Right, cymbal. Bass drum, please, Neil. Okay, and snare drum. Thank you. Now, Prokofiev uses a lot of percussion instruments in Peter and the Wolf, but he doesn't use them all at the same time, so there's nothing that I could find in the score that could have them played the same way that we had the strings, woodwinds, and brass. So the percussion section has just put something together on their own, so please go ahead and play something as an ensemble. There you have the 4 families of instruments which make up a symphony orchestra: strings, woodwinds, brass, and percussion. And now we're ready to play Peter and the Wolf for you. Peter and the Wolf is also a little unusual in that it has a narrator, somebody who tells you the story. And to do that, Mr. Boyd Barrett is going to do that for us today. And Boyd, if you'd come out, please, and if you would welcome to the stage.
This is the story of Peter and the Wolf. It is told with music and words. Everybody in the story is represented by a different instrument of the orchestra. For instance, the bird by a flute. The duck by an oboe. The cat by the clarinet in a low register. The grandfather by a bassoon. The bad wolf by sinister horns. Peter, the hero of the story, by the string section. And later, the hunters by the kettle drums and the bass drum. So, now, as you hear the story, you'll be able to distinguish the various characters: the bird, the duck, the cat, grandfather, and Peter and the wolf. Are you ready? Here is our story. Early one morning, Peter opened the gate and went out on a big green meadow. On a branch of a big tree sat a little bird, Peter's friend. "All is quiet," chirped the bird gaily. Soon a duck came waddling out. She was glad that Peter had not closed the gate and decided to take a nice swim in the deep pond in the meadow. Seeing the duck, the little bird flew down upon the grass, settled next to the duck, and shrugged her shoulders. "What kind of bird are you if you can't fly?" said she. To this, the duck replied, "What kind of bird are you if you can't swim?" and dived into the pond. They argued and argued, the duck swimming in the pond, the little bird hopping along the shore. Suddenly, something caught Peter's attention. He noticed a cat crawling through the grass. The cat thought, the bird is busy arguing. I'll just grab her. Stealthily, she crept towards her on her velvet paws. Look out! Shouted Peter, and the bird immediately flew up into the tree. While the duck quacked at the cat. From the middle of the pond, the cat crawled around the tree and thought, is it worth climbing up so high? By the time I get there, the bird will have flown away. Grandfather came out. He was angry because Peter had gone into the meadow. It is a dangerous place. If a wolf should come out of the forest, then what would you do? Paid no attention to Grandfather's words. Boys like Peter are not afraid of wolves. Grandfather finally saw Peter, took him by the hand, led him home, and locked the gate. No sooner had Peter gone than a big gray wolf came out of the forest. In a flash, the cat climbed up into the tree. The duck quacked, and in her excitement, jumped out of the pond and started to run. But no matter how hard the duck tried to run, she couldn't escape the wolf. He was getting nearer, nearer, catching up with her. And then, he's got her, and with one gulp, he swallowed her. And now, this is how things stood. The cat was sitting on one branch. The bird on another. But not too close to the cat. And the wolf walked around and around the tree, looking at them with greedy eyes. In the meantime, Peter, without the slightest fear, stood behind the closed gate, watching all that was going on. He ran home, took a strong rope, and climbed up the high stone wall. One of the branches of the tree around which the wolf was walking stretched out over the wall. Grabbing a hold of the branch, Peter carefully climbed over onto the tree. Peter said to the bird, "Fly down and circle around the wolf's head. Only take care that he doesn't catch you." bird almost touched the wolf's head with her wings, while the wolf snapped angrily at her from this side and that. How that bird did worry the wolf, and how he wanted to catch her. But the bird was more clever, and the wolf simply couldn't do anything about it. Meanwhile, Peter made a lasso, and carefully letting it down, caught the wolf by the tail and pulled with all his might. Feeling himself caught, the wolf began to jump wildly, trying to get loose. But Peter tied the other end of the rope to the tree. And the wolf's jumping only made the rope round his tail tighter. Just then, the hunters came out of the woods. Following the wolf's trail and shooting as they went. Sitting in the tree, said, "Don't shoot. Birdie and I have already caught the wolf. Now help us take him to the zoo." And then, imagine the triumphant procession. Peter at the head of the procession. After him, the hunters leading the wolf. Winding up the whole procession, grandfather and the cat. Grandfather tossed his head. Well, what if Peter hadn't caught the wolf? What then? Above them all flew Birdie, chirping merrily. My, what fine ones we are, Peter and I. Look what we have caught. And if you would have listened very carefully, you would have heard the duck quacking in the wolf's tummy, because the wolf, in his hurry, had swallowed her alive.
Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope we'll see you at another Roswell Symphony Orchestra concert sometime in the future. Thank you again, and good afternoon.